Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I know it's been a little bit, but today I wanted to walk you through just some thoughts and reflections I've had thinking on my 10 years using personality type in my own life. In 2014 was when I picked up my copy of Gifts Differing and I really started to deep dive into personality typology. Like many of you out there, I started to watch YouTube videos and then I eventually started to create my own YouTube videos. I started applying the information in real life as opposed to just thinking about it as a framework for understanding people. And in around 2016, I started to see really meaningful changes in my life and how I was interacting with others that I would largely attribute to using personality type as a model for doing so. So today I just wanted to walk you through a few of my reflections, a few of the lessons that I've learned, and why I think personality typology can be beneficial to you in the long run and in your own life. Let's get into it. I think, like many people out there, I was drawn to personality type initially because I had always felt like maybe there was something a little bit different between me and the people around me. My first interaction with personality type was in high school. I don't remember exactly what year it was, but we were in a health class and a guest speaker came in and they administered the Myers Briggs to us. And at the end of the test, all of us had gotten our scores and we went up on the board and tallied what personality type we were. And I remember in this class of 20 or so people being the only INTJ in the class. And at that time, I thought that was really interesting. They gave us the descriptions for these types, and I remember reading, okay, so I'm someone who's generally introverted. I have a preference for ideas. I tend to be someone who thinks about things, and I'm generally going to be acting on the thoughts that I have and trying to shape the world around me. And when you combine all these together, you get someone who's pretty introverted and driven towards their own personal goals. And I was like, yeah, that fits me to a T. And then I didn't really think about it again for like 2 or 3 years. High school went by and I just continued to go down the same path I was on. And then sometime around 2014, I started to think about type again and I started to think about people in general. And I kept having this nagging feeling of like, I feel like I'm not who I'm supposed to be, or I don't fit in my own skin, or I just don't feel right, essentially. Like something just didn't feel right. So I started to look for solutions and answers for that. And I stumbled again onto personality type, which is what uh, convinced me to buy Gifts Differing, which is the kind of source material book for personality type for the layperson, for someone who's not too deep yet. They're not reading Young yet. So this was the book that really, I think, changed my life and started to give me perspective on a lot of the things that I didn't know about myself. To give a little bit of perspective as to who I was in 2014, it's a very different person than who I am now. So in 2013, I graduated high school as a straight D student. I had failed many classes. I was not academically doing well. Despite this, attempted to go to community college afterwards and was meeting the same results. I failed a bunch of classes. I then ended up working at Taco Bell for a few months, and then I worked at Walmart for the next following 6 years, 5 years, 6 years, I think it was. And I stayed there for a long time. I was extremely overweight. I was 300 pounds. I had been single my entire life. I did have friends. I wasn't like lonely or anything. I had a group of friends who I grew up with and I still interact with today, people that were close to me. So that really wasn't an issue. I think I was just stagnant. I was at a place in life where I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't have any sense of where I wanted to be going. I knew that I wasn't doing well in academics and I had dropped out of community college. And I was just kind of at this weird place where I was working and living my day to day life in 2014. And that was really the thing that got me to start looking into personality type. And if there was more to myself or my own mind that I hadn't really kind of thought about or figured out yet. Reading Gifts Differing was the first big catalyst for me when it came to really adapting and starting to use personality type in my own life because I had a general understanding of what the personality types were. I had taken the 16 personalities website quiz again. I had watched a few YouTube videos, but reading Gifts Differing offers a good foundational framework for understanding personality types. And it also eases you into things like cognitive functions and the Jungian side of personality type, which, if you're someone who's using personality type through lenses like the Myers Briggs, you're eventually going to get to the Jungian understandings. You're eventually going to get to cognitive functions. So, how did this act as a catalyst for me? What about personality type was so meaningful for me? Well, for one, it acted as a rough guideline for understanding not only myself, but how I differed from other people. And I think this is the strongest strength of personality type. This is where it really shines. And as someone who is a clinical personality researcher, I work with the 5 factor model. I work with, empirical models of personality. I still think that personality type trumps these models when we're talking about the layperson, when we're talking about the average person who wants to understand themselves in relation to others. And it's because generalizations, when they're not abused, can be a really meaningful thing for understanding, right? So, like saying that I'm an introvert and saying someone else is an extrovert is a meaningful comparison, even if there's not really like a switch in our brain that says introvert or extrovert, or like there's this clearly dividing line somewhere in the middle between the two. Most people are going to have traits of both of them, but having that category, having that split is functional for applying a lens of understanding. So you can see that you differ from somebody else. So even just applying that across the base personality types in the MBTI, the 16 types, it allowed me to view myself in comparison to the world around me. Okay, I'm an introvert. I'm intuitive. I have a preference for thinking, and I tend to be judging. So, what does that mean when I'm going to be coming across someone who has different preferences? What if I come across an ENFP? Okay, well, now I have a framework for understanding the differences between us. And now I can attempt to shift or navigate the conversations with people who are different than me in a way that not only accommodates their needs, but I can then inform them of my needs based on my preferences. So this was the first big thing about personality type is it massively improved my communication with other people. It allowed me to understand where we were crossing wires and what wasn't working, and also allowed me to understand what it is that's important to other people first and foremost in a conversation. Like if I'm talking to someone with a sensing preference, now I know that if I go on a random tangent about an idea that I have, it's probably not going to stick with them. It's probably not going to be interesting. So just this general upping and improvement in my communication style was the first big thing that I got from understanding typology. And that happened really quickly because, again, we're working with generalizations. We're working with very rough categories when we talk about personality types, but being able to understand those differences at a very general level and an overview level allows you to apply things quickly. You don't have to worry about specifics. You don't have to say, okay, so he's at the 95th percentile of extroversion, so he's super extroverted. That means I need to adapt in this way. It's like, no, he's an extrovert and I'm generally an introvert. What steps generally can an introvert have to communicate better with an extrovert? And it allows you to start applying those things quickly, which I attempted to start doing in my life at that time. And I started to see improvements right away with how I was communicating. The second big change that personality type had in my life is in relation to understanding my weaknesses and the things that I wasn't aware of in my own personality in my mind. So, in the Myers Briggs and the Jungian models as an INTJ, my last function is extroverted sensing because I'm an introverted intuitive first type. And the way to think about this is I started to become aware of my own shadow, like the part of myself that was sitting behind me, influencing my life that I didn't really recognize was there because I was just, ignoring it, is now something that I had to bring into my own awareness. And bringing things that you're bad at or unaware of into awareness is a bit of a painful process because you have to admit that you're not truly at your greatest self, or you're not truly who you could be, and you essentially have to break yourself down and build yourself back up from nothing. And that's kind of what it felt like at that point in my life, where I really didn't have a solid understanding of who I was, and I felt like something was missing. And becoming aware of these weaknesses, in particular the sensing component in my life, was something that was big for me. So in the Briggs model, the Jungian models, people who have sensing last, specifically extroverted sensing and last, tend to be prone to being really cautious with new sensory experiences, missing out on opportunities in life. They tend to not be aware of their own physical body and the sensations that they might be feeling towards those things. And they might be prone to things like overeating or even things like drug use, which is not something that I was doing. But I was someone who overate and was not paying attention to how my physical body was feeling and how I was reacting to the world around me. And the biggest reflection of this, I think, was my weight at the time. I was someone who was, again, I mentioned 300 pounds. And once I brought that into awareness, once I started to really think about how I was ignoring the fact that every time I picked up food, it was just some sort of like sensory filler. It was just something I was doing to kind of fill a void in my life. It started to change how I interacted with things in the sensory world. I started to say yes to more opportunities. I started to watch what I ate, and I actually started calorie counting, which was for me a huge change because over the next 3 years, I would lose 130 pounds. and keep most of it off. I would say I've kept about 50% of it off. Gained a little bit back since I became a dad. But either way, it was a huge change at the time, right? Going from 300 pounds to 170 pounds was a big change for me. And I think that partially that was due to becoming aware of the fact that I was ignoring all of this sensory stuff in my life and I was bringing it into awareness and now acting upon it. So that was the second real big change for me is becoming aware of my weaknesses, my shadow, bringing them into awareness, and then acting on those weaknesses, making some sort of meaningful change in my life based on the weaknesses that I had noticed from the system. And I think this is really important if you actually want to use typology in your life. Don't just learn what your personality type is and go, great, this is who I am, and this is what I'm good at, and this is what I'm bad at. We're done. No, it's to say, okay, these are my strengths naturally. How can I use these well? And now, how can I become aware of the things that I'm not very good at and plan around them and schedule around them? One of the biggest mistakes I people see people make is that they try to master the things that they're not good at. They essentially try to become their shadow. They try to become their opposite. And I think that's one of the worst things you can do if you want to grow and become your authentic self because you're trying to be who you're not. Instead, what you want to do is be aware of how you can plan around that weakness. What are the steps that you can take using the strengths you have to make sure that the negative influences of that weakness are not going to be interrupting your life? Say, for example, as an INTJ myself, it's important for me to say yes to new opportunities, to new physical experiences, these sorts of things, and to do things occasionally. But that doesn't mean I need to be actively seeking them out all of the time and trying to be like an ESFP or someone who naturally finds fun and enjoyment in those sorts of things. No, there's kind of a healthy middle ground between the two. You still want to be yourself. You still want to be someone who's reflective, intuitive, but you want to allow new experiences in life to act as fuel for those things, to act as something that can allow you to think more clearly, to think better. So, again, the second big thing for me with personality type was becoming aware of my own weaknesses and then acting on those in a meaningful way and actually applying the information that I was learning from personality type. On the opposite end of the spectrum from weaknesses, it also helped me to develop my strengths and the things that I was actually good at, or the things that I had interest in specifically, I think is an even better way to think about it. What are the things that motivate me or you in life when we are thinking about our personality type? And as an INTJ myself, as an intuitive first type, it really helped solidify the idea that I wanted to work with something theoretical in my life. At around 2016, 2017, I had started thinking about personality type. I had started applying it. I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do with life. I was really trying to figure out what I wanted to do with like work and how I wanted to make money. And at that time, I was thinking very like pragmatically. I was like, oh, maybe I could become a manager at the store that I'm working at, or maybe I could go into the hotel industry because I have an uncle who works, in upper end hotels, and he could maybe get my foot in the door. I was thinking about it in the lens of like money and just like trying to get by. And when I started to think through the lens of personality type, through the lens of, okay, I'm an intuitive first type and I want to work with something theoretical, that was something that led me to psychology. And that was the thing that convinced me to go back to college in 2017. And I think there was such a huge mental mind shift, and that now I was interested, and now that I knew what I wanted to do, I could actually apply myself. That, as I mentioned earlier, I was a D student, almost failed out of high school. I dropped out of community college, and then I returned to community college in 2017, and I was a straight A student, and I managed to keep that straight A all the way to the end of my bachelor's degree, graduating with a 3.98, only getting one A minus on the entirety of my degree. And I think that was the perspective shift that really helped me find my interest, was finding out that intuition is something that's important to me and that I want to be working with something theoretical. It pointed me in the right direction of interest. Another perspective or another way to think about this is that when I first went to college, I thought I wanted to work in like computer science and cybersecurity, which wouldn't be a terrible job for an INTJ, right? It's something that could be done, but it just wasn't something that actually spoke to me. And once I started to dive deeper into personality and more theoretical things, that's when I really found my passion. So the third real benefit of personality type, in my opinion, is pointing you in the right direction for things that might be interesting or meaningful to you. And that doesn't mean you have to do what your personality type says that you should be doing. And that's not the lesson I want people to take away from this. But I do think it's a great way to start thinking about things that might be meaningful for you, and even better, might not be meaningful for you, right? Like the things that would be very high sensory first jobs were things that I could probably just cross off my list immediately because I know that I'm not going to want to be doing those things. Or maybe even things that are kind of like social or emotional. Those are things that are probably not going to be interesting to me as an INTJ. And being able to kind of narrow the pool down of things that I want to do from this larger list into something more meaningful. And then finally landing on psychology was something that I attribute mostly to personality type, even though it was a process that took a few years. It wasn't something that just happened overnight. It wasn't like, oh, okay, I found personality type. Now I want to be a psychologist because that's what the book says that I should be doing. No, it was something that evolved and developed over time as I found out about my personality type, what its strengths were, and how it tended to interact with the fields that it usually does interact with. I've talked a lot about the positive things that have come from personality type in my life, but there are also some limitations to personality type that I've, thought about and learned throughout my use with it that I think it's important for people to know as well. The first is that personality type can't fix everything, especially when it comes to communicating with others. Personality type can give you a framework, a foundation for understanding how you might be different than someone else, how you might better communicate with them, where you might not be seeing eye to eye on certain things. But that doesn't naturally mean that you're always going to be able to overcome those differences. Sure, it's often worth it to try, but there are going to be people in life that no matter what you do, you're probably just not going to get along with. Like you have very different fundamental values. There's someone who maybe is very neurotic or angry, and you're someone who's like timid and agreeable, and maybe you're just not going to be able to mesh very well in the long run. Ultimately, there's going to be people that no matter what, you're probably just not going to get along with. And personality type can maybe help you minimize the difficulties that come with that, but that doesn't magically mean that you're going to be able to become friends with or get along with people who you probably weren't going to get along with anyway without type. So don't think of personality type as a fix all solution. Think of it as something that can be applied in situations to maximize the good from conversations and relationships you have with other people while attempting to also minimize the bad that comes from them. Something that builds off of this that's really important to remember is that you shouldn't see personality type and typology models as a complete 100% representation of personality and the human experience. And what I mean by this is imagine like we have the entire range of what it means to have a personality. So, like 100% of a bar. Personality type might not even be half of that. It might just be some small portion, like 20% or 30%. It's just this representation of a portion of people's personality that isn't entirely represented through the model. And a good way to think about this and how the Myers Briggs is limited compared to some other ways of thinking about personality is the Myers Briggs doesn't include things like neuroticism. And neuroticism is a very important personality trait that is a predictor for things like mental difficulties, anger, frustration, impulsivity. Neuroticism is a very important personality trait that isn't represented in typology models. That doesn't mean they can't coexist. It just means that personality type models need to be a framework that is understood in such a way that it is not entirely representative of the human experience and is simply something that you should use alongside other understandings of psychology and personality. So if you're someone who's learning personality type and you're learning about these traits and these functions, make sure that you're also getting a balanced perspective by diving into some other literature in psychology about how personality is studied and the traits that we're learning about in scientific papers, these sorts of things, and why they're important, right? So we want to know the entirety of our personality, and to do so, we have to look beyond just type. But type is a great foundation to get started with, and it's a good way to represent a large portion of the personality. It's just not the entire solution. It's not the entire thing that is our personality. It's just a portion of it. The biggest piece of cautionary advice that I would give towards people who want to apply personality type in their life is to not get stuck in the theory stage forever. And what people will often do when they're understanding or learning personality type is they'll pick up a system, they'll learn a little bit about themselves, and they'll either drop it or they'll move to another system with similar terminology, similar things about it, and learn all they can about that one, or they'll spend all this time like learning and arguing over what the specific definitions are and what that means. And it's not like that isn't important, right? Because we want to have better definitions, we want to better understand these systems that we're working with. But so many people stay stuck in the theory stage of personality and they never actually do anything with it. They just treat it as something fun to learn, and then they don't apply it in their life in any sort of meaningful way. And I think that like you're not going to do any harm by doing this, right? But I think if you want to use personality type meaningfully, you have to pressure test it. It's kind of like doing martial arts, right? Like I do historical European martial arts, swordsmanship, and I can do drills, I can practice swords moves, I can do all these other sorts of things. But if I don't actually get in the sparring ring and try some of these things on other people and learn how to apply them in realistic situations, then they're not actually meaningful. And this is something that I had to learn myself as someone who's an intuitive first type, right? Because sensing, the opposite of intuition, is where a lot of application in life comes in. And as someone who's an intuitive first type, I like to just sit in the theory and understand things for a long time. But it's not until we actually start applying the things that we are learning, that we are understanding, that we're going to start to see meaningful results in our life. So if you're someone who's learning personality type, don't stay stuck in the learning stage forever. Don't stay stuck in the stage where you're trying to find your own personality type for like more than a year. Like I've literally met people in my coaching and typing business who have gone to like more than 15 practitioners trying to find out what their personality type is. And in my opinion, you're better off, getting a good foundation, like a general rough idea of what your personality type is, and then trying to apply the things related to that type in your own life to see if you can glean something meaningful from that. Because at the end of the day, what we're getting from the types, the lessons that we're learning is why type exists in the first place. Like Jung wrote about type so he could describe people in general so that we could see that there's these differences among people. Briggs explicitly wrote Gifts Differing so that she could help people get along who might not be communicating in ways that are going to be congruent because of their personality type preferences. And in fact, the logo, or I don't know if it's still the logo, but the old logo for the Myers-Briggs company was four hands coming together, which was supposed to represent the four preferences of the personality types coming together in unison, representing that differences can kind of meet in the middle. And that's something that I think is really important when we're talking about personality type, is really applying it, is really using it and not getting stuck in that theory stage, that learning stage forever. And this is particularly important for people who tend to be introverted and intuitive and have a thinking preference. So INTJs, INTPs, and also I find like INFJs really get stuck in this stage sometimes too. Well, types like ENFPs, for example, get stuck in that stage I was talking about earlier, where they're going to be wondering what personality type they are. They're going to see themselves in every personality type a little bit. But really, what needs to happen for all of these types is to start applying the lessons that you're learning from type as opposed to just learning type because it's fun to learn. So, those are the key takeaways and things that I've gained from using personality type over the past 10 years in my life. Ultimately, I would say personality type and using it has been an extremely huge net positive for me. And I think for a lot of people out there, especially those who are in a state of identity moratorium, they don't know who they are, they don't know what they want to be doing in life. I think understanding personality type can be a great first step in the right direction for you. It can be a great framework for understanding how people work, how you work, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, how those might interact with certain job fields and future things that you want to do, how those traits might interact with people who are important to you or people that you want to get along with. It can help you with relationships. I know for me, it's been very meaningful in my relationship. And I think in general, personality type is just a huge net positive if you use it responsibly, which is the big thing. You have to use it responsibly. You have to understand that it is not the entirety of the human experience. It is not a representation of the entire human personality. It is simply a framework that represents a portion of it that can help you understand yourself and others. I hope this video was meaningful and helpful for you, and I hope that you are able to understand and use personality type in your own life if you want to. Have a great day.